Our story begins with a young man who spent 2 months of bliss with his sudden summer bride, though he hadn't touched a single page of his physics homework. Just after he and his wife shared an intimate moment, he received some truly wonderful news. His physics professor had resigned, meaning he finally wouldn't have to worry about catching up on those assignments. He was so happy he could practically fly, but his wife gave him a piercing look and asked if he really hated the professor that much. He explained that Professor Xia was a good person. He simply found it impossible to actually learn physics. Curious, he then asked her if she knew why the professor had suddenly decided to quit. Now, Fu Bangguan didn't seem like the type to gossip at all, at least not usually. He told her that old Xia had announced in class that his daughter was obsessed with men and completely unproductive. With no one to run the family company, the poor man had to return to work personally. Who could say for sure? Fu Bangguan merely frowned after hearing his explanation. She muttered that her father was certainly promoting her well, but before he could react, she quickly changed the subject. She insisted he still had to learn physics, asking why he should feel grateful to such a useless, boy-crazy daughter. He agreed, of course, wearing an expression of pure relief. To him, that supposedly useless daughter was a savior who had delivered him from a sea of academic suffering. However, Fu Bangguan reminded him that Professor Xia was only stopping his personal lectures. That didn't mean the subject was disappearing from his life entirely, much to his chagrin. He told himself he couldn't possibly be unlucky enough to encounter another teacher quite as strict. When he wondered aloud if a beautiful female professor might replace him, Fu Bangguan found she couldn't stand the suggestion. She immediately warned him, demanding to know exactly what he was plotting in that head of his. She reminded him of his status as a married man, and seeing the danger, he very quickly admitted his mistake. Deep down, he knew he wasn't ready to leave the comfort of his wife's arms just yet. After all, he still wanted to enjoy those quiet, intimate moments with her when the sun went down. On the following day, however, he woke up to find the entire house wrapped in a heavy silence. There was a note from Fu Bangguan left on the menu, simply stating she had gone to work. She told him to eat his breakfast like a good boy, reminding him that his first class of senior year was physics. He walked into the classroom feeling as though he were marching toward his own certain doom. The room stayed silent for exactly 3 seconds before it suddenly exploded into a frenzy of excitement. His classmates were desperate, demanding to know everything about the mysterious woman standing at the front. Naturally, he immediately lifted his head to see who was on the platform, and he couldn't believe his eyes. His heart gave a sudden, violent leap in his chest as recognition set in. It was Fu Bangguan, and so, as if by some strange magic, the word wife escaped his lips in a shout. In the very next second, every single pair of eyes in the classroom turned toward him in total shock. Realizing he had made a terrible mistake, he quickly stood up and apologized to the new professor. His friend tried to cover for him, jokingly claiming he wasn't quite right in the head and called every beauty his wife. Fu Bangguan paused for a moment, noting with a dry irony that young men really ought to be more persistent. And here we see her officially introduce herself to the class as Professor Fu Bangguan. She explained that Professor Xia had temporarily left the university due to a sudden job transfer. From now on, she would be the one taking over the senior physics course, much to our protagonist's surprise. She had already coordinated with Professor Xia regarding the teaching style and how they would be graded. The final exam results, she noted calmly, would be determined strictly by the system she had now established. His head felt as though someone were striking him with all their might, a dull throb that wouldn't subside. His own wife had suddenly become his professor, a development he certainly hadn't seen coming. He wondered if she hadn't been working at Jean University all this time, or if he had simply misunderstood. How on earth had she ended up here at Southern University so abruptly? To be honest, he never imagined that in his final year of college, he would be living out a teacher-student romance. It was truly scandalous, especially since Professor Xia had already sent the homework assignments via email. She announced that the class representative would need to deliver the completed assignments to her office shortly. As for those individual students who hadn't brought their homework, they were told to submit it by tomorrow morning at the latest. One student jokingly asked if she could teach him personally, even if it were only for 3 days. She ignored the chatter and asked for silence so they could finally get down to business. Homework, she explained, was a matter of principle first and a matter of fairness second. She knew some of them had hoped for a stroke of luck after hearing the news of Professor Xia's resignation. If the work wasn't in her office by 10 a.m. tomorrow, their participation grade would be cut by half, a harsh reality, indeed. This, she reminded them, was exactly what Professor Xia had warned them about before the summer break. Deep down, he felt a desperate urge to walk up to the platform and question her right then and there. He couldn't help but wonder if those individual students she mentioned were actually just a reference to him. Just yesterday, she had seen him gloating, and now, some of the other boys were already trying to flirt with her. One brave soul even asked Professor Fu if it would be possible to add her on the Line app. She told them to forget about Line, noting dryly that her email was only active during official working hours. And so, she concluded by acknowledging that today was merely her first time meeting them all. She invited them to ask anything, and naturally, someone immediately asked if Professor Fu was single. At that moment, Fu Bangguan's gaze swept over him with subtle, calculated precision. She calmly replied that she wasn't single at all. In fact, she was already married. They had wed recently, she added, promising to invite everyone for wedding sweets once they graduated. She concluded by saying she hoped they would all have a pleasant and cooperative year together. The moment those words left her lips, the entire classroom erupted into a frenzy once again. On the surface, he remained as calm as an old dog, but inside, his heart was absolutely racing with fury. To be honest, the pen in his hand was lucky it hadn't been snapped in two by his grip. He muttered, "Liar," under his breath before checking the class group chat, which had already changed its name. The new title was, "I Want to Marry Fu Bongguang," because apparently, her strictness couldn't hide her beauty. He couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't been the one lucky enough to end up with such a wife. He told himself that as soon as they got home, he was going to give her a real piece of his mind. When Fu Bongguang finally arrived home that evening, she found the first floor completely empty. She headed up to the second floor, only to discover that he had already locked the door to the bamboo room. A small quilt and a single pillow had been pointedly laid out on the sofa in the living area. It seemed she had been evicted from the bedroom, so she softly called out, "Chun, open the door." He decided to pretend he hadn't heard a thing, prompting her to ask if he really intended to stay inside. She mentioned that on her way back from work, she had noticed a brand new barbecue joint had opened up. She had bought some to share and asked if he wanted a taste, since she hadn't eaten dinner yet. His resolve wavered instantly as he shouted toward the door, asking what exactly she had bought. She listed them off: grilled skewers and oil-fried pork belly, just to name a few. He realized then that she was a master manipulator, choosing exactly what he liked most. After opening the door and seeing her beautiful face, he felt a sudden urge to pinch her cheeks. He snatched the barbecue from Fu Bongguang as she softly asked if her husband was still angry. He told her not to bother and insisted that she stop calling him her husband. He claimed he wasn't her husband at all, knowing full well he hadn't done his homework yesterday. And there she had been, in front of everyone, laughing at his expense. He asked if she did it on purpose, wondering if he was just entertaining false hopes. Seeing him so upset, Fu Bongguang simply curled her red lips in a look of pure disbelief. She then reminded her dear Chun to remember to hand in his homework secretly tomorrow. That cheeky expression of hers was, quite frankly, driving him absolutely crazy. She noted that even if he started writing now, he probably wouldn't be able to finish. With a quick, "good luck," she mentioned she would be in the study for a meeting. She added that if he needed anything at all, he knew exactly where to find her. And so, our poor Chun was left all alone to face his mountain of homework. He decided to turn his frustration into an appetite, eating until he was completely full. But soon enough, the worry returned. It seems hunger is the only thing that masks stress. Once his stomach was satisfied, 1,000 other concerns began to crawl back into his mind. We see him open his notebook, only to be struck dumb by what he finds inside. The workload was not only absurdly massive, but more importantly, he didn't understand a single problem. He knew perfectly well that Fu Bongguang was a woman of strict principles. If he truly couldn't hand in that homework tomorrow, his participation points would definitely take a hit. He decided to forget his pride, telling himself there was no shame in asking for help. Especially not from his own woman, he thought, as he knocked on the study door. He walked straight in, pleading for his wife to please help him out. But we see that Fu Bongguang was mid-meeting, with a crowd of cheering voices erupting from her computer. It was only then, a bit late to be honest, that he realized exactly what he had done. In a total panic, he turned and bolted right out of the study. A minute later, Fu Bongguang found him with his head buried deep in a pillow. She asked what he wanted and told him to come out, assuring him they hadn't seen a woman on screen. He didn't need to feel embarrassed, she said, though they certainly had heard his voice. He told himself it didn't matter. If they heard him, then they heard him. After all, she was his wife, and what was so wrong with calling her that? Only then did he crawl out, wrapping both arms around her in a desperate hug. He pleaded with her, "Wife, do it for the sake of our marriage." He asked if she could delay his deadline, and Fu Bongguang had to admit those words pleased her. She fought to suppress the small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She told him she couldn't, prompting him to ask if she was still his wife or not. She confirmed she was, but reminded him she'd stated in class that homework was a matter of principle. If he hadn't written a single word, she asked, shouldn't she deduct 80% of his grade? "Fu Bongguang, you're really crossing the line, aren't you?" he muttered, feeling the pressure. He desperately asked if she couldn't just deduct 50% instead. He still needed 3 more credits to finish his studies. After all, if she took away 80%, he realized with a sinking feeling that he truly wouldn't be able to graduate. She gently told him that those participation points were definitely gone, calling him darling as she did so. If he wanted to earn them back, she suggested it would all depend on how their Aiken behaved himself. He leaned in and softly kissed the corner of the woman's lips, hoping for some mercy. "Student Aiken," she said with a playful air, "seduction isn't going to work here." Besides, she mentioned something she'd heard. Did he call every pretty girl he saw his wife? He shot back that yes, he did call every pretty girl he saw his wife. He told her that this Professor Fu could go ahead and deduct his participation points if she really wanted to. At most, he figured he would just get married again before he graduated. That would give him another 5 credits. From today on, he declared, they were strictly teacher and student. He insisted it was better to keep their distance, whether they were at school or at home. He told her that while Professor Fu was in charge, she should simply do her duty. She told him to stay in the side room then, adding that if dear Aiken wanted his wife, he could come find her himself. He claimed he was hungry and knew better. Why would he bother going to look for her? Furthermore, he told her that in the future, he wouldn't allow her to wear those torn fishnet stockings to class. She asked if Aiken was jealous, smiling as she promised to listen to her husband. In the future, she assured him she would only wear them at home. She promised they would be for her husband's eyes only, and with that, she locked the door to go to sleep. We see that the 3 main physics classes of the week are scheduled for the first 3 days. They really don't give a person a moment's peace, he thought, looking at the woman up on the platform. Today, true to her word, she wasn't wearing those fishnet stockings. Before starting the lesson, she announced she would first address the issues with the summer homework. It turned out there were still 5 students who hadn't turned in their assignments. As a result, 50% of their participation points would be deducted. However, she noted that student Suchin hadn't written a single word on his summer task. For him, 80% of his participation points would be taken away. She told the class she hoped they would take this as a warning and submit their work on time in the future. She warned them that without those points, they would fail the subject even with a perfect score on the final exam. He wondered who had a personal vendetta against him, though she mentioned points could be earned back through active participation. She hinted that by completing subsequent tasks, he might be able to recover a portion of what he lost. Watching Fu Bongwan do this to him was difficult, and his roommates in 506 were already giving her a failing grade in their minds. Even though he had no desire to listen to the lecture, he had to swallow his pride and keep paying attention. Deep down, he was terrified of losing another 10 points. At noon, while everyone was resting in the dorm, his friends were all genuinely worried about his credits. Then, word got around that there was a welcoming party happening next Saturday. It turned out that anyone who attended the party would earn 2 social science credits. He immediately cheered up and, as soon as he left school, called his mother to ask her to send him his guitar. Upon returning home and opening the package his mother had sent, he discovered to his dismay that the guitar was damaged. When Fu Bongwan arrived later that evening, we see that he was already busy trying to repair the instrument. He explained that he had to participate in the welcoming party next week, no matter what. His plan was to go up on stage and play the guitar to earn those much-needed credits. His mother had sent it just today, but somehow, it had been broken during the journey. Fu Bongwan examined the guitar and quietly estimated that it couldn't be fixed in such a short time. She told him it didn't matter and offered to take it for professional repair the next day, though it would take a few days. He insisted it wasn't necessary, thinking he could simply borrow one from the club instead. Fu Bongwan said nothing more. She simply repacked the broken guitar and placed it by the door. She then asked him, with some curiosity, how he had even come up with the idea of participating in the party. He made a face, reminding her that Professor Fu was being quite ruthless by docking 80% of his grade. Going to the welcoming party seemed to be his only hope of recovering those lost credits. After saying his piece, he turned around and headed up to the 2nd floor. His only goal now was to finish the dishes early and prepare himself for a good night's sleep. However, Bongwan soon opened the door and walked in, clutching a pillow as she stood by the bed. He asked her who had given her permission to enter, reminding her of the agreement they had made. Whether at school or at home, he insisted they were strictly teacher and student. She told him to come sleep by her side, urging Suchin to show a little more ambition. He told himself he couldn't afford to go soft on her now, not after how she had treated him. She asked him then, quite directly, if her husband truly didn't want to hold her while they slept. She urged him to think about how soft and pleasant she would be to hold. And, as she pointed out, other places weren't exactly out of the question either. He insisted he didn't want her, but Fu Bongwan knew he was just being stubborn, so she leaned in and gently lifted his arms. She tucked herself right into his embrace and asked Suchin if he had missed her. Deep down, he was absolutely crazy about her, while she simply noted how obedient her dear Chun was being. The next day, when he returned home after school, we see that a brand new guitar was waiting for him. Fu Bongwan was there with him, busy preparing a meal in the kitchen. He asked her why on earth she had bought such an expensive guitar after what he'd told her. He reminded her he only needed it for the welcoming party, but she insisted it didn't matter, even if he only played it once. She told him he could play it at home in the future and encouraged him to practice well before she came to see him perform. He thought about the massive crowds at Southern University these days and felt a flicker of concern. If Fu Bongwan actually showed up at the party, she would undoubtedly win over a whole new wave of admirers. He suggested it would be better if Professor Fu stayed in her office to prepare her lessons instead of attending. She asked if her husband simply didn't want to see her, knowing that ever since she took the job at the university, there were plenty of people willing to spend a fortune just to keep her at home as a lady of leisure. He asked if she realized how many people wanted her, accusing her, rather dramatically, of being unfaithful just by being herself. Of course, Fu Bongwan could see quite clearly that her husband was just being jealous. With an amused smile, she asked him to explain exactly how she was being unfaithful. He grumbled that she dressed too well and made herself look beautiful every day, which, in his mind, was practically a crime. Fu Bongwan smiled to herself, realizing that being praised by her husband in such a roundabout way felt rather wonderful. She playfully agreed, promising that from now on she would listen to her husband and stop dressing so beautifully. She suggested that if he was truly afraid of someone stealing her away, he should simply buy her a ring to show the world she was married. It was only then that he realized nearly 3 months had passed since their wedding, and he hadn't given Fu Bongwan a single gift. He decided that once the welcome party preparations were over, he would find a truly decent gift for her. After all, his fate of graduating without any trouble was still very much in her hands. Yes, he still thought of her as a bit of a handful, but after a few days of practice and his solid foundation, things were looking up. We see that his guitar practice over the last few days had actually been going quite well. On the night before the performance, he found himself looking over the sheet music again and again, terrified of making a mistake. Fu Bongwan arrived home quite late that evening, leading him to ask why she had been delayed for so long. As it turned out, she had been busy preparing a special surprise for her dear Aiken. The moment he heard that a gift was involved, his entire face seemed to light up with curiosity. He eagerly asked her what kind of present it could possibly be. With a smile, Bongwan pulled a beautifully wrapped box from behind her back. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief, telling her he wouldn't dare wear something that looked so expensive. He worried about what might happen if he ruined it, wondering how he could ever pay her back. Fu Bongwan gently stroked his face and called him a silly boy, assuring him the gift was entirely for him. She told him there was no need to return it, as it would be his to keep forever. She asked if her husband wanted to try it on, and 2 minutes later, he emerged from the dressing room. Fu Bongwan's eyes widened at the sight, while he nervously asked if he looked all right. She assured him he looked wonderful, exceptionally handsome, in fact, and he thanked his wife sincerely. Fu Bongwan looked at him, her ears turning a slight shade of red from the compliment. The weather was clear, and with his solid foundation and days of diligent practice, he felt ready for the evening's welcome party. At the party, he performed his piece to perfection, but as the show came to an end, something was missing. He scanned the crowd, but he couldn't find Fu Bongwan anywhere, which was quite frustrating. He wondered if she had actually stayed away just because he had told her not to come. She had never seen him perform before, so he walked to the back gate of the school and opened the car door. There, he found an enormous floral arrangement with a note calling him darling and praising his hard work. She was congratulating him on his success. It was the first time he had received flowers since finishing his exams. Still, he felt a twinge of regret that Fu Bongwan hadn't been there to see the performance in person. He looked down at his phone and checked his social media, tapping on a new notification in his circle of friends. And there it was, a post on Fu Bongwan's profile showing that she had indeed been watching him. It was a photo of him performing, captioned with the poetic phrase, "The full moon rises in the starry sky." We see the photo was taken from the back of the administration table, a perfect vantage point. He asked if she had blocked the school teachers, but she explained this WeChat was only for family, not work. Well, one has to admit, she really is a very cautious person. His regrets vanished instantly. It was turning into a beautiful day, though we know beautiful days rarely last forever. He felt a bit overwhelmed, as if he couldn't stop the rush of emotions from his successful night. After taking a shower, he went to sit behind Fu Bongwan to talk about the evening. He told her he hadn't realized she possessed such impressive photography skills. Pointing at the color grading in the photo, he even asked her for advice on how to adjust those specific settings. Fu Bongwan didn't even have time to speak, and we see that the note he had written for her was labeled infertile. Well, Fu Bongwan said absolutely nothing. She simply sat directly on top of him and kissed him. Confused, he asked what she was doing, but Fu Bongwan didn't offer a single word in response. She only asked him insistently, "Darling Aiken, don't you know what you've done?" With a perfectly clear conscience, he truly had no idea what he could have possibly done wrong. As he stammered, asking what happened, Fu Bongwan had already begun unbuttoning his shirt. Then, his sister's voice drifted in, asking what the note he had given her actually said. She asked if he remembered now, and he found himself completely paralyzed for a long moment. He realized that must have been when, well, things were starting to click. To be honest, this woman is the type who never stops to listen to explanations. Who would have thought that Fu Bongwan would end up completely entangling herself with him? He knew there was no escaping her that night, and on Saturday, he finally opened his eyes at noon. There was no longer anyone by his side, so he stretched and slowly made his way downstairs. We see several dishes already waiting on the table, and he pointedly dragged his chair to make some noise. Fu Bongwan emerged from the kitchen carrying the final plate and sat down right next to him. She asked what was wrong, but he said nothing, his mind still swirling with the events of the previous night. She told him she was sorry and admitted that she had behaved quite badly the night before. She offered to take him to the hot springs later, leaving him feeling a bit dazed and confused. She mentioned there were hot springs in Nanshan and told him to eat well so they could leave soon. He looked at her without saying a word, but as they were about to head out, he noticed she didn't look well. "Fu Bongwan, do you feel unwell? Why don't you look like yourself?" he asked with concern. He wondered if she had a fever or a cold, but she simply insisted she would be fine in a moment. He wasn't convinced, noting that a fever is serious and could even damage the brain if left untreated. We find them at the Nanshan People's Hospital, a place she rarely visits since she almost never gets sick. Standing in the clinic lobby, he felt a bit lost, not even knowing which number to request for her. She told him not to worry and suggested they go to Valvo instead, which seemed like a better plan. She had a friend there, and so, he found himself driving Fu Bongwan all the way to the city of Valvo. Upon arrival, a doctor greeted them, surprised to see Sister Bongwan at their hospital. Fu Bongwan leaned into him, giving him a hug before offering a quick introduction. She introduced the doctor as Jian Jian, an old friend from her university days. Then she introduced him as her husband, Su Chun, prompting a friendly, "Hello, brother-in-law," from Jian Jian. He felt an indescribable wave of embarrassment, but managed to ask the doctor to check her thoroughly. He explained she was fine yesterday, but had changed today, in a hospital. After all, there are only patients. Jian Jian asked him to wait outside for a while, assuring him that she would take good care of her friend. Inside, Jian Jian asked what was really going on and why she hadn't told Su Chun the truth. Fu Bongwan simply pointed at Jian Jian, perhaps signaling for her to keep quiet or listen closely. When the doctor emerged, she told him it was just a fever, though Fu Bongwan seemed unable to repeat what was said. He sensed there was more to it and asked what was exactly wrong, pleading with her not to hide anything. The explanation was vague. Apparently, his sister had simply been repressed for far too long. Being repressed didn't sound too grave, and on the way back, he spent the time staring thoughtfully out the window. How embarrassing. He couldn't help but wonder, what exactly did it mean to be repressed for too long? Had he made an impression the night before? Absolutely. That night, he lay in bed reflecting on his life. He worried about the dangers of a woman being repressed for such a long time. It seemed like a machine that had suffered through far too many hazards. It felt suffocating. But, speaking of which, they were actually married now. Was there really a need to feel ashamed? It wasn't as if they hadn't done this before. He decided he couldn't let her fever continue, and with that thought, he walked toward the study door. After confirming that Fu Bongwan wasn't in a meeting, he stepped directly inside. He slowly approached Fu Bongwan, lifted her from her chair, and sat her on the desk, his arms gently encircling her slender waist. Her skirt was already short, and sitting there made it even shorter. He told her they were married now and shouldn't be so delicate. He reminded her it wasn't their first time, though his voice was deep and his ears turned an unnatural shade of red. As it turns out, nothing actually happened that night. He looked at her in shock, angry that she had lied to him. She laughed softly, admitting she just wanted to take him home. He stood up and left, locking the bedroom door behind him. He felt toyed with and told her she was never allowed in the master bedroom again, just as a scandal erupted at the Nansen group. The gossip was flying. They had a brother-in-law now, and everyone was realizing Sister Bongwan had actually gotten married. Everyone wondered who the lucky man was, guessing it must be that tall, handsome first-year student named Su Chun. They marveled at her, assuming she was staying home all day just to be in her husband's arms. But they were wrong. She had shown up at the hospital today, and apparently, she had somehow given herself a fever. The idea of her inducing a fever was so absurd they joked they'd laugh about it for 3 years, while Fu Bongwan watched the messages in misery. She told them she wasn't in the mood, especially since she'd been kicked out of the bedroom, a defeat no one thought possible for her. The next day, while Bongwan was teaching her class, we see Su Chun staring at her until she became visibly nervous, wondering what on earth he was doing. He teased her, asking if she liked the attention, while privately thinking that if a woman like her didn't like you, life would be very difficult indeed. He told himself that if she took away 80% of his grade, anyone would have a personal grudge, and he was already plotting his revenge against Fu Bongwan. When a boy in front of him began whispering about how good the professor's body looked, Su Chun wanted to scream that the boy was nothing but a disgusting creep. He felt quite formidable, telling himself he was irresistible, and with a smug look, he watched the woman on the podium, planning to show her what that really meant. He wanted to see if she would keep playing tricks, since he only had one class. He headed straight home afterward and quickly ordered a few things he needed. He looked at the accessories he had at home and waited for her. When Bongwan finally arrived, she found the lights on the first floor were all turned off. She worried that Su Chun was still angry and might have run away, but then she noticed a sliver of light leaking from the master bedroom upstairs. Relieved that he was home, Bongwan put on her pajamas and slowly entered the room, but just as she reached for the switch, he told her not to turn on the light. He told her he was sensing something, and after a moment, he asked if her promise from that morning, to let him punish her however he liked, was still valid. Bongwan took a step closer, asking how he intended to punish her. He replied that first, she wasn't allowed to resist, no matter what he did. He warned her that if she dared to resist, he would never forgive her. She agreed, deciding that tonight, she would let her husband have his way. She obediently closed her eyes, and after a long silence, she felt him standing behind her, using something to cover her eyes so she couldn't see. She asked what was happening, noting how proactive he was being, and he simply told her to enjoy this unexpected display of true love. When they were settled, she suddenly told him to get off her, but he wasn't about to be that obedient and slowly began to unbutton his shirt instead. He told her to be patient, and after a while, he finally grew tired of teasing her, asking if she could find it in her heart to forgive him now. Bongwan promised to forgive him because he had been so good, and blushing furiously, she quickly ran off to the bathroom to compose herself. By the time she returned, he had changed into normal pajamas, though he still felt a bit strange about the whole situation. He realized that since they hadn't actually reached that stage yet, he felt a lingering nervousness that he hadn't noticed before as she curled into his arms. She told him not to overthink things, as they wouldn't go further until they were both ready, and he decided that for now, only hugs and kisses would be allowed. Miss Bangwan nodded, agreeing to whatever her husband said. The next morning, when he woke up, she was already getting dressed, and we see those 2 scars on her wrist. Feeling a bit uneasy, he told her she should try to wear long sleeves from now on, or else he'd truly have to go live on another planet. Perhaps because he stayed up too late, he couldn't even lift his head in class until Qiao Yinzhou nudged his shoulder, telling him to wake up because Professor Fu was there. His friend asked if he'd told the professor he had a girlfriend. Su Chun, still lost in a sleepy haze, insisted he didn't and had simply gone to bed too late. The boys noted he was giving himself away, since they hadn't even asked why he was tired yet, a moment of stupidity he quickly regretted. He returned to the dorm at noon, where his friends demanded a confession. Meanwhile, during her lecture, some sharp-eyed students noticed the marks on Bangwan's wrist. The group chat exploded with rumors about what kind of monster her husband must be, while Su Chin felt like his secret was being stolen right out from under him. Back at the dorm, Xiao Yinzhou pushed him onto the bed. Feeling helpless, Su Chin finally admitted that while he didn't have a girlfriend, he did like someone. His friends teased that their boy had finally opened his eyes, asking if they knew her, but he told them not to ask more until the time was right. He tried to make his escape, telling them he couldn't hang out during the National Day holiday because he preferred to go play with Bangwan and Dolly. He had wanted to visit Yunnan for a long time, so he asked Bangwan to book an early flight. He was so exhausted that he decided to nap on the plane. After a quick nap on the plane, we had finally arrived. I pointed toward the 5-star hotel, standing before us. She looked confused, asking if we weren't staying at a guest house. I simply told her to trust me on this one. She pointed out that guest houses aren't soundproof, and of course, he knew exactly what she meant. He planned to rest today and see the sea tomorrow. While he was lying in bed watching videos, Bangwan began to touch him again. Soon, only a few dim lights remained, and the atmosphere became quite ambitious. He nervously asked what she was doing, unable to look her in the eye. The air felt strange, and he felt himself losing a bit of his usual control. She asked if he had any requests, but he denied it. Even though his body was telling a different story, she told him to be honest with his wife. She leaned in to see if her baby was lying to her. The next morning, he woke up to find Bangwan still curled up peacefully in his arms. Remembering the night's events, he felt a sudden urge to turn away and run, thinking he might have been a bit too rough with her. She snuggled even closer, and as he thought back to the night before, he asked if she had planned this all along. She admitted she had. He jokingly blamed her, noting they were supposed to see the sea today and it was already late. He opened the curtains to see the water sparkling beautifully. Fu Wanwan popped a piece of fruit into his mouth, playfully asking if he was satisfied with her performance last night. He wondered how she could be so shameless. She reminded him they'd been married a while, yet he was still shy. He told her to hush, though he'd actually bought her a special ring in Yunnan as a reward. Fu Wanwan declared she should love herself and her husband even more. Over the next few days, she took him everywhere to eat, drink, and have fun. She was incredibly considerate, leaving him with absolutely nothing to worry about. However, he was confused that since their first night in Yunnan, things hadn't progressed past light hugging. Even if she didn't want to, he certainly did. They planned to return to Nanshan on the last day of vacation, but as we know, plans often change. A massive storm hit, canceling their flights, so the moment he finally made it home, he collapsed onto the sofa. Fu Wanwan knew he hated eating out. She prepared everything he'd been craving, as he'd missed her home cooking dearly. It seems that after a few days away, Su Chun had learned how to be pampered. That night, as he stroked her back while she lay in his arms, he felt a bit dejected. She snuggled closer, telling him to be good and just rest. Feeling frustrated, he pushed her away and sat on the edge of the bed. Sensing something was wrong, she quickly got up and turned on the bedside lamp. She lifted his chin to look him in the face, asking what was wrong. She gently took his face in her hands, urging her darling to tell his wife everything. Her questioning only made him feel more depressed. Before, she used to tease and provoke him every day, leaving him in a constant state of psychological suspense. He wondered why she was suddenly acting like such a reserved wife. She explained that after that one night, she thought he was exhausted and unhappy, so she wanted him to rest. She took his hand firmly, asking if he could feel how much she loved him. Since Su Chun was being so proactive, she told him he wasn't allowed to reject her now. It was another sleepless night. Ever since their great life harmony, she had become even more dependent on him, proving that a woman's appetite can be quite terrifying. The next day, she had to work overtime at the office. After lunch, he packed a meal to bring to her, but the moment he walked in, things took a turn. Fu Wanwan was waiting in her office, and before he knew it, she had him pinned against the wall. He protested when she went for his neck, suddenly remembering the school forums where so many people were openly lusting after his wife. The thought made him incredibly annoyed. He wondered if those people were simply blind. She was already wearing a diamond ring, yet they still approached her with such shamelessness. Just thinking about it made his blood boil, and in the next second, he pulled Fu Wanwan tightly into his arms. He gripped her slender waist, then lowered his head to bite her neck, leaving 3 very clear marks in no time at all. Fu Wanwan, you have a husband, he reminded her, his voice thick with a sudden, protective possessiveness. He told her she needed to protect herself, as there were far too many bad men out there these days. She simply smiled, promising that she would listen to her husband, which, knowing her, was a rare concession. The following day, we find him in physics class, where he was once again fast asleep at his desk. He couldn't help but wonder why on earth there had to be 3 physics classes every single week. 2 of those classes started at 8 in the morning, and the bell had just finished ringing. Before he could even lift his head, he heard constant cheering erupting throughout the classroom. The moment he looked up, he felt like leaving the planet. That woman was actually wearing a white shirt. And against that white fabric, those 3 marks on her neck looked even more obvious than before. The bolder students on both sides of the room didn't hesitate to start making a scene about it. She told everyone to be quiet, casually mentioning that she had made her husband angry the day before. After hearing that public confession, his face turned dark with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. When she asked who could solve the problem on the board, Su Tianlei stood up and volunteered. Su Tianlei rose from his seat and began walking slowly toward the platform at the front of the room. Our protagonist raised his head, his gaze fixed on the white shirt Su Tianlei was wearing. Naturally, no one in the room was blind, and everyone had noticed the marks on Su Tianlei's neck. Between the marks and that white shirt, he found himself feeling incredibly annoyed by the whole display. Deep down, he was waiting for someone to finally unmask the truth about the situation. It all came down to Fu Wanwan's status and the delicate matter of keeping their relationship hidden, unintentionally or otherwise. She only offered a faint smile and said nothing, leaving the air thick with unspoken implications. Wasn't this a clear sign? Had she and Su Wanwan actually spent the entire night together? Given Su Wanwan's immense popularity at Nanda University, the rumors were already flying by the time he reached the cafeteria at noon. By then, this little scandal had already become the biggest news on the entire campus. He ordered his food, but to be honest, he didn't have much of an appetite at all. Just then, he saw Su enter the restaurant, even purposely loosening his collar as if he were afraid someone might miss the mark on his neck. Later that afternoon, once school was finally over, he made his way back home. Confronted with the braised shrimp Su Wanwan had prepared, he simply told her he wanted instant noodles instead. She told him to be good, reminding him that those noodles didn't have much nutritional value. Besides, she noted that his stomach hadn't been feeling very well over the last few days. She insisted he couldn't eat junk food, but he was already in a foul mood and wasn't about to listen. He snapped at her, asking if he wasn't even allowed to eat a simple bowl of instant noodles anymore. Su Wanwan had been busy in the laboratory all day and was likely exhausted herself. Realizing he was genuinely upset, she gave in, turned around, and went to the kitchen to prepare the noodles for him. We see him coming downstairs after his shower to find that Su Wanwan had already set the table. It was, as it turned out, a bowl of luxury instant noodles. She had added so many extra ingredients, gently warning him to eat slowly so he wouldn't burn himself. After he had finished eating and drinking his fill, he found that he felt much better. She asked him to tell her what happened. He showed her his phone, and as her expression darkened, he suddenly felt he might have overreacted. After all, she was working so hard on her experiments and still came home every night just to cook for him. He realized his attitude earlier had been uncalled for. He believed her, but since the other girl hadn't explained it that way, he couldn't help but feel a bit hurt. Su Wanwan simply ruffled his hair and told him not to worry, promising to handle everything herself. That night, as he held Su Wanwan close, he asked her if she ever felt like he was just causing himself unnecessary pain. She looked at him tenderly and asked why he would ever think such a thing. He told her that from now on, he wanted her to stay far away from that Su Tianlei. Su Wanwan nodded obediently, agreeing to do whatever her husband asked of her. We see that by Sunday the weather was beautiful, and in a much better mood, he found a sunny spot on the first floor to relax. He spent the entire day working on his sketches, and as he passed the study, he noticed Su Wanwan had just hung up the phone. She reached out to pinch his cheek playfully, asking if he was finished with work and if he wanted to go for a walk. He agreed, but remembering the call, he asked if he had interrupted her work. She paused for a moment before explaining that it was actually her father calling to check in on them. He wanted to know how they were doing. Interestingly, this was the first time since the wedding he'd heard her mention her father. It suddenly dawned on him that they had been married for 3 months, yet he still hadn't met his father-in-law. He suggested that they should go visit her parents soon, as he didn't want to seem disrespectful. To be honest, he felt that staying away this long might make him look quite bad. She agreed to go the following weekend, promising to introduce him to her friends as well. It seemed like a perfectly normal conversation, the kind of domestic reality a married couple shares, until Su Wanwan remembered something. She told him the matter with Su Tianlei had been settled, and indeed, he saw the proof for himself at noon. Su Tianlei had posted an apology on the campus forum, clarifying that he was leaving school and that his relationship with Su Wanwan was strictly professional. Our story continues as his dormitory group chat exploded, with everyone agreeing that a woman like Professor Su would never settle for someone like Su Tianlei. How shameless. The messages read, questioning how he was any different from a homewrecker trying to stir up trouble. He felt vindicated, thinking that his wife clearly wasn't that kind of person, despite what that group of guys told Chun. The chat continued to buzz, with one friend jokingly asking why he was so quiet, wondering if he was hiding something. Su Wanwan's voice drifted in slowly from behind him, and as he turned around, he felt a sudden jolt of surprise. He quickly shoved his phone under the pillow, playfully asking how she could possibly be spying on a private conversation with his brothers. She teased him about what else she might have seen, mentioning their silly debates about which nursing homes would have the best views. His hands moved restlessly around Su Wanwan's waist, and in response, she simply leaned in to give him a tender kiss. Deep down, he knew he was in trouble, as the room was suddenly filled with a heavy, lingering tension. After a completely sleepless night, he finally got up in the morning, noticing that his right eyelid wouldn't stop twitching. He had a nagging feeling that something was about to happen, but he decided he would still go out to have some fun later. He mentioned it was his last class, and that he might not be coming back home that night. She repeated his words, questioning the idea of him staying out, and for a moment, he was ready to hear a firm no. But she reconsidered. After all, since Hachin had married her, he hadn't really had a chance to go out and enjoy himself. She told him to be careful if he stayed out late, which made him pause. Was she actually agreeing to this? He thanked her enthusiastically, calling her the best wife ever, before remembering to mention one more thing. She explained that she had to attend a forum conference for the physics department that afternoon, so another professor would be covering her class. She reminded him to pay attention in class, but as soon as he stepped onto the school grounds, his mind was already elsewhere. He quickly messaged his friends, letting them know that Professor Su was at a conference and a substitute would be taking the physics class. The group was thrilled. If Professor Su wasn't the one teaching, they felt they could finally relax a little bit. Since the substitute was only there temporarily, they figured no one would really know who was who anyway. She surely won't take attendance just to kick anyone out. So can I really do it? He wondered. You two are far too brave, one of them remarked. Hachin, how do you even know Professor Su is attending that forum conference this afternoon? He explained that he'd overheard her chatting with another professor on the way back, by accident, of course, so the source didn't really matter. In any case, the news was reliable, but he realized he still had Chun Ming's ID card in his possession. They had agreed that she would come to look for it after school that afternoon, hadn't they? He suggested the others go ahead to order the restaurant and the cake, promising to join them as soon as class ended. You're choosing the opposite sex over your friends now, aren't you? They teased, noting his change in priorities. He told them that if he didn't skip class, he could still help them out later, which seemed fair enough. And so, they decided to leave class right then and there, leaving Jianlin Tao to act as the rear guard. As they stepped off the school grounds, Hu Yinzhou still felt a lingering worry, questioning if they were truly doing the right thing. Big brother, today is your birthday, they reminded him, and that is the most important thing right now. He decided to simply focus on happily celebrating his birthday, and with that, he stepped into the bakery. Meanwhile, Jianlin Tao was still messaging Chen Ming, confirming he would meet her at the school gate after class to return her ID. He was looking forward to celebrating with his brothers, grateful for the chance he'd been given to go out and enjoy himself. Back in the classroom, a voice called out for silence as the lesson was about to begin. At that very moment, a familiar voice drifted in, and he felt like a complete coward. Hadn't he said that Professor Su was busy working at some forum this afternoon? To be honest, Professor Su almost never took attendance in her classes anyway. The group chat was buzzing frantically, as no one usually dared to skip a class taught by Professor Su. Was the person standing there now a ghost? Meanwhile, at the bakery, the boys watched eagerly as the clerk handled the freshly baked cake. Is there anyone from our class who went to the restroom and hasn't returned yet? She asked. Fu Bangwan realized the truth immediately. Her own husband and his close brothers were all missing. Originally, Fu Bangwan really was supposed to attend that forum, but she couldn't bear the thought of not seeing him all night. And so, she decided to show up for class anyway, a dedicated professor, to be sure, which, as fate would have it, resulted in her catching her husband skipping her own lecture. I don't understand, one of the boys said. Let's just head straight to the classroom. We see the three classmates who had failed to show up for the lesson, completely unaware of the storm brewing. You truly deserve to be called a design genius, brother, one of them remarked with genuine admiration. He felt a bit overwhelmed. Jeriel's constant stream of praise was actually making him blush with embarrassment. He insisted it was no big deal, suggesting they quickly contact Jianlin Tao to send him the restaurant's location. When he opened his phone to message Jianlin Tao, he was greeted by over 99 frantic notifications in the group chat. He realized he was finished. Professor Fu had arrived and noted that all three of them were absent. There was a very real chance of a formal sanction, a thought that made him check his phone with trembling hands. In the group chat, there was a photo of Fu Bangwan standing at the podium with a notably grim expression. At the dinner table, he sat distracted and heavy-hearted, repeatedly telling his brothers how sorry he was. He felt he had dragged them all down with him, apologizing over and over for the mess he'd caused. Because of the looming trouble, none of them were really able to enjoy the meal anymore. The plan to stay out and get drunk until late into the night was clearly no longer an option. They decided to wrap things up shortly, and by around 9 o'clock, the group began to disperse. He even prepared himself to take a taxi home, hoping he could find a way to explain everything to Fu Bangwan. Just after crossing the traffic light, he spotted Fu Bangwan's car parked right at the edge of the road. He walked over and climbed inside, but Fu Bongwan didn't even spare him a single glance. Deep down, he felt quite embarrassed, telling her that he could explain everything if she'd listen. He admitted he thought she'd be at the forum, and since it was Zhu Jianhao's birthday, he had made a choice, though Fu Bongwan simply kept her lips sealed in a cold, silent stare. He tried to take the blame, asking her not to punish his friends, but she dryly reminded him that he couldn't even protect himself, let alone play the hero for others. Once they arrived home, he began to plead with her, promising it was the last time and begging her not to record his brothers' names in the official log. He even brought her washed fruit to soften the mood, but she told him to take it away. He knew she was a woman of principle, and a missed class usually meant a certain penalty. For the sake of his brothers, he decided he could endure a little suffering, so he headed to the shower to psych himself up for the task of winning her over. When he emerged from the bathroom with only a loose towel around his waist, she looked at him with such serious intensity that he felt an immediate urge to retreat. He quickly turned around and hopped into bed, teasingly telling her to stop reading and look at him, while she told him to put on pajamas and stop being indecent. He jokingly questioned how that could be indecent, and while she remained silent, he gently took her hand and gave it a playful little nip, a tactic that actually made her laugh. He told her she could decide his punishment tonight, which made her blush at his flirting, though she clearly wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. She told him that tomorrow morning, all three of them were expected to wait for her in her office. And so, the next morning, we see the three of them standing in a neat, nervous line right outside Fu Bongwan's door. She told them to come in, and Zhu Jianzhou immediately entered and gave a deep, 90-degree bow to apologize. He told her he was truly sorry and explained that it had been his birthday the day before. Fu Bongwan simply wished him a happy birthday, a response that left all of them completely stunned. She explained that regardless of the reason or the subject, there was simply no excuse for skipping class just to go out and have fun. However, she noted that since they usually performed well, especially Su Chun, this wouldn't be treated as a major disciplinary scandal. Instead, it would be handled as a standard absence, resulting in a 5-point deduction from their final grades. "Thank you, Professor Fu," they said, wishing her a long and peaceful life, though Su Chun knew they had no idea how hard he had worked for them last night. Back in the classroom, his friends even started teasing him, joking that he had clearly done everything in his power to soothe Fu Bongwan's temper. He made a firm decision then and there to get some proper rest for a few days, hoping to finally recover his strength. As it turns out, Fu Bongwan had grown quite melancholy, as she hadn't seen Shin for an entire week. She began to think that he only ever sought her out when he needed something. Now that things were quiet, it seemed the man was simply hiding from her, which, naturally, was not helping her mood. Feeling neglected, Fu Bongwan shared her sadness with her group of best friends and decided to go out for a few drinks. They teased her, asking if both of these powerful women were really going to be ignored by their dear husbands. One of them joked about why she always took advantage of innocent male students, referring to what the boss had said. Fu Bongwan told her dear friends to say no more. She simply needed their company tonight. She asked if they could come, and later that night, when Su Chun arrived home, he discovered that Fu Bongwan was nowhere to be found. He thought about calling her to give her a chance to explain, and when the phone picked up, he offered a simple greeting. A voice answered, "Brother-in-law, it's Jianjian. Bongwan has had a bit too much to drink." She promised they would bring her back, and that they would be arriving at the house very shortly. When he hurried down the stairs, he saw that Jianjian's car was already parked right at the entrance. He asked her why she had drunk so much as he reached out to steady Fu Bongwan. Jianjian told him she was leaving Bongwan in his hands, and with that, the friends prepared to head out. He thanked them profusely and wished them a safe trip home. He then lifted Fu Bongwan into his arms and carried her back inside the house. Looking at the woman resting on the sofa, he wondered why she would drink so much that she couldn't even find her own way home. We see that this was, in fact, the very first time he had ever seen Fu Bongwan truly drunk. In her hazy state, Fu Bongwan reached out and wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, pulling him close. She asked him if he still knew who she was, calling him her dear husband with a slurred smile. He was almost tempted to laugh, but just as he tried to stand up, Fu Bongwan gripped him even tighter. She pleaded with him not to be angry, admitting, in her own way, that she knew she had been wrong. She even promised that, from now on, she wouldn't put him in such difficult positions at the school. He gently told her not to drink so much again, reminding her that the world is full of people with bad intentions. He added that she shouldn't just hug anyone or act like a spoiled child so easily, which was fair enough. She insisted she understood, declaring that she had been in love with her husband for many years now. He told her she wouldn't make that mistake, though he noted his wife was currently the most confused person in the room. They had only been married for half a year, after all. The next morning, he finally woke up at 10 o'clock. As he made his way downstairs, Fu Bongwan approached him with a freshly fried egg. She asked if he was still angry, playfully mentioning that she had recorded a video the night before. She teased that if he ever bullied her again, she would post it on the campus forum for everyone to see. It would show the world exactly how the normally cold and beautiful Professor Fu behaves when she's at home. She told him she had made these fried eggs with love, specifically for him. She had even gone out of her way to prepare his absolute favorite breakfast. Since it was Friday, she only had one class to attend for the entire day. She had been saving up at the mall for quite a long time, it seemed. Now, she was preparing to buy a few things to take along for a visit to her in-laws. Feeling a bit nervous, he brought the gifts inside, only to hear a voice asking if the two of them were planning a rebellion. He wondered if he even had a voice in this house, caught between his physics professor of 3 years and his personal idol. At that moment, we see Fu Bongguan and Xiaoguo practically trembling in the corner. Fu Yin turned around and finally laid eyes on the young man standing in the doorway. She noted to herself that he looked even more handsome now than he did as a child. Fu Yun was a woman of the world, a world-class fashion designer. In fact, she had been his idol since he was little, and now Fu Bongguan was dragging him toward the door. Fu Bongguan told her mother she was scaring him before introducing Chen to her. He then met her father, Professor Xia, having had no idea all this time that the professor was actually Fu Bongguan's father. He politely greeted them as Uncle Xia and Aunt Fu, offering a respectful hello. He explained that they had planned to visit tomorrow, while Aunt Fu remarked on what a sensible boy Chen seemed to be. She then turned her attention back to the other two, who together were over 80 years old. She asked them if they ever bothered to consider the consequences before they acted. She repeated the question with growing frustration, upset that an event as major as a marriage was kept from her. It seems we are beginning to understand. Aunt Fu had only just discovered she was going to be a grandmother. He quickly stepped in, asking Aunt Fu not to be angry and explaining that Bongguan simply hadn't known how to tell her. Aunt Fu told Chun he was a good boy, but insisted he didn't need to defend those two. She maintained that what Fu Bongguan did was wrong, prompting Bongguan to suggest her mother and Chen take a rest. She proposed that she and her father would prepare the meal while the others relaxed. In his mind, he had always imagined Aunt Fu would be the picture of dignity and elegance, which she was, in her own way. To be honest, it was the first time we've ever seen a scene quite like this one. He agreed with Aunt Fu, telling her how much he truly admired her design work. He had liked her work since he was a child, and so he began searching for topics of conversation. It's funny how a person who is normally so sociable can suddenly find themselves feeling completely antisocial. Aunt Fu told Chen that this whole marriage business was a serious lack of consideration on Bongguan's part. She promised she would punish her for him, as both of them had kept her completely in the dark. She asked if he didn't think it was too much, considering they only told her after the marriage certificate was signed. She noted that the stubborn old man was still helping her before telling Bongguan to bring Chun home tomorrow. They were to have a formal meal, and the message was clearly understood. She told her father to be careful on the way back, while Bongguan felt as if his eyes were piercing right through her. She smoothed her hair with a guilty look as he began to question her. He asked Bongguan if she had anything to explain, and she simply apologized to her husband. She admitted she shouldn't have hidden it. He said nothing, simply turning away to go work on his sketches alone. But his heart was not at peace and his mind was a total chaos, making it impossible to draw anything. Suddenly, he felt an immense pressure. He had always thought his in-laws were ordinary professors, not leaders of the Waxia group. One of them, after all, was a world-class designer of the highest caliber. He realized Aunt Fu was one of the most prominent professors in the city, with a family background and strength far beyond his own level. A little later, Bongguan called out to Chun, inviting him to come out and have some fruit. Fu Bongguan didn't wait for an answer before she pushed the door open and stepped inside. She saw him sitting there at his desk, looking completely lost in his own thoughts. Chun looked up and told Bongguan that, for the time being, he simply didn't want to speak with her. She pleaded with him, asking if he truly believed she had intended to hide the truth from him. He replied that he finally realized she was the disappointing daughter Professor Xia had mentioned before. He felt as though she were mocking him, but Bongguan quickly set the fruit aside and threw herself into his arms. She looked at him and asked if, now that he knew the truth, he no longer wanted to be with her. He hadn't actually said that, of course, but it seemed Bongguan felt truly insecure in their relationship. He warned her that anyone who lies must eventually pay a price for their deception. Since her behavior had been so poor, he decided she would have to sleep alone for the time being. Startled, Bongguan jumped up, but he didn't give her a single chance to explain herself further. He went straight to the bedroom to sleep and, quite pointedly, locked the door behind him. And so we come to the following day, where we find the two of them together again. Despite the tension, they proceeded with their plans to visit the family villa as scheduled. Upon arriving, they presented the gifts they had prepared for her father and mother. He admitted that he had been far too nervous the day before to know what to say. Bongguan looked into Xia Guohua's eyes and noticed the deep dark circles under them. No questions were necessary. It was obvious his wife had kicked him out of the bedroom, leaving the poor man with very little rest. Aunt Fu welcomed them with a warm smile, insisting that bringing gifts really wasn't necessary at all. She asked if the food was ready yet, and checked to see if Chun was feeling hungry. She told him that while Bongguan was older than him, she still had the mindset of a child sometimes. She added that her daughter had a temper, and if she ever crossed the line, he should tell her so she could punish her. She even went as far as to say that if things didn't work out, she would simply find him someone better. He looked over at poor Bongguan, who was watching them like a worried child. After dinner, Aunt Fu led him away to her secret base for a private conversation. They didn't come out all afternoon, and though Bongguan tried to eavesdrop several times, the room was far too soundproof. Her father told her she wouldn't hear a thing and suggested she just sit quietly for a while. She snapped back, asking him if he wouldn't be worried too if his mother was trying to replace him. Finally, at 7 in the evening, the two of them emerged from the room at last. Chen was carrying a box in his arms, and Bongguan immediately stepped forward, dying to see what was inside. Unexpectedly, he dodged her, and the car ride back home lasted nearly an hour in silence. Throughout the entire journey, he kept staring at his phone and smiling to himself like a fool. Bongguan wanted to ask what was so interesting, but she was too annoyed to say a single word. Once they arrived home, she couldn't take it anymore and blocked his path at the door. She demanded to know exactly what her mother had said and if he really intended to replace her so easily. He simply asked her if she knew a woman named Suyin, which she did not. He explained that Suyin was the daughter of Aunt Fu's very best friend. Apparently, she was quite tall and a member of a professional dance team. He noted that she seemed to fit all his preferences perfectly, so why not meet her? He reminded her that this was the price for her lies, and that he was going to get to know this new woman. Bongguan was horrified, accusing him of already planning a future with someone else. They had only been married for half a year, and yet, it seemed he had grown bored of her already. He mentioned that he'd heard Aunt Fu say this and was quite tall, nearly 5'7". Since she was a professional dancer, her figure was likely quite impressive, wasn't it? Suchin, no, please, no, no, no. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. No, no, no. It was simply too much for her to handle. No, no. She wondered if her husband truly didn't love her anymore, but that felt impossible. Later that afternoon, on the way back home, he stopped to buy some cold medicine for her. He held it out and handed it to Bongguan, telling her to take it before her condition got any worse. She begged him not to abandon her, promising she would never bully him at school again. She swore she would never hide anything from him again, insisting she wasn't rejecting him. He told her to hurry up and take the medicine while he went to prepare a bowl of noodles for her. He suggested that after eating, she should get some sleep to help her feel better. He got up and made a bowl of scallion noodles, and soon the entire house was filled with the delicious aroma. Bongguan looked down at the bowl of noodles, moved to the point of tears by the gesture. She asked him, almost in a whisper, if he had truly forgiven her at last. She wondered if he only felt pity because she was sick, but he assured her his forgiveness was real. He told her just not to lie again. Bongguan quickly finished her noodles and then clung to her husband as they went to sleep. Bongguan curled up against him like a little kitten, admitting she hadn't slept well lately, fearing he didn't want her. He sighed and asked Bongguan if she could please stop being so incredibly insecure. He explained that he'd only wanted some time alone at Huasi, yet she had immediately assumed he wanted a divorce. He asked her if their relationship was really that fragile, calling her by her full name, Fubangwen. He confessed that he truly liked her very much, that he loved her, in fact. He told her not to think such foolish things in the future, asking if she understood. The next day, when Fubangwen arrived home, she noticed he had added a safe to the house. He asked her what she thought of it, explaining it was the gift his mother had given him yesterday. Everything was now safely under lock and key, including a jade pendant his mother said was a family heirloom. He showed her the family property deeds, noting that his mother had even put Huasi in his name. He admitted he didn't want it all, but his mother had insisted on giving it to him anyway. He remarked that, regardless, everything the family owned was now in her hands and his mother's. He joked that he and his father had nothing at all, aside from their salary cards. That evening, Fubangwen's best friends arranged to meet up at a bar for drinks. Fubangwen seemed quite calm, though her husband felt a bit nervous before they headed out. She told him not to be anxious, assuring him that her friends were very easy to get along with. When they arrived at the private booth, only Jianjian and Nansen were there waiting for them. Nansen immediately spoke up, excitedly asking if this was the famous brother-in-law. She introduced herself as Nansen, reminding him he'd met Jianjian before, though he barely recognized her. Who would have thought that Jianjian, who seemed so serious in her white hospital coat, was the same person? And yet, here she was, standing before him in a tight pink dress. Quite a transformation, to be honest. Another friend arrived, announcing she couldn't possibly be late to meet the new brother-in-law. She introduced herself as Jian Suru, mentioning she was also from the Huxing Institute. He looked at Jian Suru standing there before him and felt a strange, almost surreal sensation. He admitted that he knew perfectly well she was from the Huxing Institute. He even asked if she had been the school flower of the high school section back then. One of the friends cut in, joking that the true school flower was, of course, their Bongguang. She then asked him if it was true that he didn't even know Bongguang back in those days. He agreed, explaining that he was only focused on his studies then, so it was normal not to know her. When the others heard this, the whole group burst into laughter. He glanced at Fu Bongguang with a hint of regret, remembering she was also from the Huxing Institute. It was bad luck, really. He could tell she was already slipping into a bad mood. He suspected Jian Suru had done it on purpose, as he knew Bongguang's temperament all too well. She wasn't angry because he didn't know they attended the same school. No, it was deeper than that. She was upset because he had remembered someone else entirely instead of her. To be honest, his wife had a bit of a habit of getting quite jealous. Eventually, a waiter approached the table looking for someone to sign the check. Since Jian Suru was sitting by the door, he caught a glimpse of her handwriting as she signed. It seems that people truly do change over time, for better or worse. Her handwriting used to be so beautiful, and seeing it now made Fu Bangguang feel deeply hurt. She couldn't shake the fact that her husband remembered the high school beauty from his younger days. After sitting there for a while longer, Fu Bangguang found an excuse for the two of them to head home. The moment they walked through the door, he immediately began trying his best to please her. "Wife, I truly didn't know that you were also from the Huxing Institute," he pleaded. He pointed out that they had been married for so long, yet she had never mentioned it. "Do you think Jin Suuru is prettier than me? How is that even possible?" she snapped back. She insisted that the woman was terrible and warned him not to speak with her so much in the future. He didn't like to judge others lightly, so he asked how she could be so sure the woman was terrible. She claimed the woman played with men's feelings and was simply not a good person, period. If it weren't for the fact that a certain letter from back then was still a Huxing, things might be different. She truly wanted to burn it, but she found she couldn't keep these things bottled up in her heart anymore. Later that night, as we see them lying in bed, he found himself unable to sleep. "Bangguang, I really can't hold this in any longer," he finally confessed. He told her he had something to say, but begged her not to get angry with him. When she asked what was wrong, he admitted that, back then, he used to like Jin Suuru. Fu Bangguang's eyes widened in shock, and just as she was about to speak, he stopped her. He asked her to listen first, explaining that he was in middle school while they were in their final year of high school. Suddenly, she had started sending him breakfast and had even written him a letter. He had assumed she liked him, and to be honest, he still had that letter tucked away at Huxing. He promised to burn it the next time he went home, but Bangguang's expression remained solemn. "Oh, my dear wife, wasn't it just because I was young and foolish back then?" he sighed. Then, she dropped a bombshell. "Chun, in reality, the person from back then was actually me." She explained that she had only asked Jin Suuru to help her deliver those things to him. She was stunned for a moment, wondering if he had fallen for the words in the letter or for the girl herself. Of course it was the letter, he reassured her, insisting that Bangguang was the only one he truly loved. Fu Bangguang, however, was deeply worried, wondering how this fool could have read the letter without ever checking the signature. Surely any mistake Chen made was the fault of Jin Suuru, the messenger, or so she told herself. In a fit of rage, Fu Bangguang opened her phone, kicked the instigator out of their friend group, and blocked Jin Suuru on WeChat. When Jin Suuru saw that chilling red exclamation mark, she knew she had been cut off. She felt more wronged than anyone could imagine, and within 5 minutes, she received a message from Jian Jian. Apparently, her brother-in-law claimed she played with men's feelings and had forbidden Bangguang from seeing her anymore. Jin Suuru was absolutely shocked by the accusation. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, wondering when exactly she had ever played with anyone's feelings. After all, she was 27 years old and had been single since the day she was born. The only man she cared for was still teaching abroad and wouldn't even give her the time of day. She wondered how, in the blink of an eye, she had become such a despicable woman in their eyes. Since Fu Bangguang had transferred the first-floor clients to his name, he rarely visited her studio anymore. On this particular day, we see that Fu Bangguang had gone to the school to work some overtime. He had been bored all morning until, at noon, he received a call from Bangguang asking him to fetch some materials from the studio. Still feeling a bit restless, he spent a little time reading while he was there. But as he was leaving, he accidentally bumped into the desk, which, naturally, was the worst possible moment for a mishap. From the cabinet right next to him, an old iron box tumbled out and hit the floor. Knowing how important everything in the studio was to Bangguang, he hurried to pick it up and put it back in its place. As the iron box hit the floor, several items tumbled out from inside. They were all letters, and though he was curious, he resisted the urge to read them. Later that evening, while they were having dinner, he found himself distracted while talking to Fu Bangguang. His mind kept drifting back to those letters, wondering exactly who they were meant for. Fu Bangguang served a bowl of soup and placed it gently in front of him. She asked him what was wrong, wondering if Aiken was perhaps feeling unwell. Coming back to his senses, he met her worried gaze and told her what had happened at the studio that afternoon. We see that Fu Bangguang's expression shifted, becoming visibly strained at the mention of the box. He quickly assured her that he hadn't read the letters, and she gave a soft, quiet nod. When he asked if they were important to her, Fu Bangguang took a moment to think. She told him they weren't important anymore, but of course, he wasn't a fool. If they weren't important now, it simply meant they had been very significant in the past. He couldn't help but wonder if she must have loved that boy very much back then. Otherwise, to be honest, she wouldn't have written so many letters. Fu Bangguang watched him as he poked at the fish on the tray in front of her. She couldn't help but laugh, teasingly asking her darling if he was feeling a bit jealous. She asked if he was afraid she liked other men. He felt his heart nearly explode with envy, yet he still insisted it didn't matter. He asked himself if he was being petty, telling himself they were just a few old letters. After all, she was his wife now, and that should have been enough. But in that moment, he realized that he really was quite a petty man. Just the thought of Fu Bangguang liking another man made him feel as if even the bowl of soup in his hand had turned bitter. He set his chopsticks down in frustration. Fu Bangguang saw right through his hypocrisy, but she didn't bother to explain a thing. She began to eat slowly, and during this time, she noticed that he often sat there staring blankly at the stone statue. It seemed he didn't even have the time or the heart to approach her anymore. She knew this wasn't right, and that over time, it would surely affect the relationship with her dear husband. So, Fu Bongguang took some grapes, walked over to the stone statue, and curled up warmly in his arms. She called him her darling Aiken and asked why he was so unhappy. She pleaded with him to tell his wife what was wrong, nestling closer against him. He gently rubbed her head and admitted that the draft of his painting for the competition still wasn't finished. She suggested that he send the draft to her mother so she could help him review it. Normally, he would ask his mother-in-law for plenty of professional advice on such matters. In fact, he had made great progress over the last 2 months, but she happened to be a judge for this specific contest. If she were to modify his entry, he felt it would be quite unfair to the other participants. No, she couldn't possibly do that. After all, her mother was the judge of the entire competition. If he did, people would surely say he was using his family influences to get ahead. She hadn't expected her husband to be so upright, which, to be honest, was a rather refreshing trait. Fu Bongguang smiled sweetly at him, yet he still felt a lingering sense of depression. He mentioned a fellow student he knew, having heard that the man had already finished his draft. Meanwhile, he was still struggling with the color saturation of his own work. He felt as though he were always one step behind everyone else, no matter how hard he tried. Fu Bongguang tried to comfort him, reminding him that being fast doesn't necessarily mean being good. Art, she said, is about polishing and refining. If he felt stuck, perhaps a walk would help. It didn't matter if he took his time, and she suggested a weekend trip to the hot springs. He nodded affectionately, and seeing him agree, she happily showered his face with kisses. Since he was finally willing to go out and have some fun, she asked what he wanted for dinner. She offered to cook, and he simply asked her to make something she was good at. He settled on Coca-Cola chicken wings and thanked her. She teased him then, saying he would have to reward her properly that night. When Friday arrived, we see them leaving the school the very moment classes were over. He slipped into the car secretly, earning a look of mild reproach from Fu Bongguang. She asked him, quite directly, when they would finally be able to make their relationship public. He promised they would go public as soon as he graduated. He asked his dear wife to be patient, as they arrived at a hotel with truly luxurious decor. As soon as they arrived, a staff member led them straight to their room. He leaned in and whispered into her ear, asking if she had planned all of this herself. She had arranged everything so far in advance. She really was quite considerate. It turned out this was Professor Xia's hotel, a surprise, though he accepted the news calmly. It wasn't so strange for Professor Xia to own a grand hotel, and it meant they wouldn't have to pay. She joked that as long as he behaved tonight, he would have an open bar forever. He was left speechless by her. One has to wonder if Fu Bongguang has anything normal in her head. She teased him, saying she was only ever this informal when she was with him. While he was showering the previous night, Fu Bongguang had gone down to cancel their plans for the night market. It was then that Su Tianlei, who was out on a date with Bei Lei, happened to spot her. Seeing her reminded Su Tianlei of everything that had happened on the school forum last time. He felt she had made him lose face, and he wasn't about to let that forum incident go so easily. He decided that today, he simply had to take the opportunity to get the better of her. Meanwhile, Fu Bongguang picked up their takeout and noticed a pastry shop just across the street. It was getting a bit late, of course, but she figured she could afford to wait a little longer. After she paid, however, her phone showed that it had run out of battery and promptly shut down. A short while later, we see Fu Bongguang hurrying back to the hotel with the cake in hand. The moment she stepped out of the elevator, she heard a massive commotion coming from outside. She stood on her tiptoes to peer inside and saw him standing by the door with his hair still wet. He had a red mark on his forehead, and seeing this, Fu Bongguang lunged at the security guard, dropping the cake. He asked her what was wrong, calling her darling as soon as he saw her return. He quickly grabbed her arm and asked her where on earth she had been. He wanted to know why her phone was off, and as we know, Fu Bongguang is quite clever. She explained she had only gone to buy a little cake and that her phone had simply died. She apologized to her darling, while the manager standing nearby was visibly trembling. The manager addressed her as vice president, explaining someone had entered the room and accidentally injured his forehead. Fu Bongguang grew deeply worried upon hearing this and immediately ordered the manager to make a call. "Chun, what happened just now?" Fu Bongguang asked, reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead with a look of deep concern. He grew worried as he listened to the explanation. He had just finished showering when he heard a sudden noise at the door. Naturally, he assumed it was her returning, so he didn't pay much attention to it at first. But when he finally stepped out, he was met with the sight of Su Tianlei, that absolute brat. She was lying on the bed with nothing on, and in his anger, he had wanted to strike her. As the story unfolded, we see Fu Bongguang's expression growing darker and more troubled by the second. "And the wound on your head?" she asked, realizing the woman had struck him with a water glass. "Darling, I didn't exactly lose that fight," he reassured her. "I managed to hit her back as well." Fu Bongguang gently traced the red swelling on his forehead with the tips of her fingers. Her eyes reddened instantly, and her voice began to tremble with a mix of fear and fury. "How could she dare?" he whispered, grabbing her hand and squeezing her fingers to offer some comfort. He told her it was nothing, just a small wound, really, trying to downplay the whole ordeal. He hadn't let her get away with it, of course, and told her to just look at the state the woman was in now. The manager then confessed quite sincerely that the intruder likely couldn't even stand up at that moment. Vice President, the manager continued, we've already called the police and reviewed the security footage. It turned out Su Tianlei had managed to sneak in while the cleaning lady was busy tidying the room. She had blended in on that floor, waited for her moment, knocked, and simply walked right in. The hotel staff, realizing the gravity of the lapse, were quick to accept full responsibility for the incident. They promised that the hotel would cover every single cent of the medical expenses incurred. But despite the apologies, Fu Bongwang's eyes remained as cold as ice. He was completely different from his usual self, and as for the hotel assuming responsibility, he wondered if they could even afford it, demanding they first strictly investigate the hotel security. He insisted that every single negligent employee be fired immediately. Furthermore, after the staff was purged, he ordered them to hand over the security footage and all evidence to the police. He was going to sue her for trespassing, and he wasn't planning on being lenient. With charges of intentional injury on the table, he wanted her to rot in jail. Thirdly, he instructed them to prepare the documents to have her expelled from Nanda University. He intended to deliver them to the director himself, just as the police arrived on the scene. Su Tianlei was still trying to defend herself, claiming she knew Fu Bongwang and had only entered to wait for her. In the end, she tried to play it off as though she were the one who had simply misunderstood. But that lie didn't last long, as Fu Bongwang threw the evidence from her phone right in front of her. She lost her nerve instantly, while he remained focused on the wound he had received. She told herself it was all her fault, thinking that if she hadn't gone down to buy that cake, none of this would have happened. And if her phone hadn't died at the worst possible moment, things might have been different. He assured her it had nothing to do with her, blaming it entirely on that dishonest brat. He comforted her, gently reminding her that she had only wanted to buy him a little treat. He was actually very happy, and we see her nestling into his arms for safety. She whispered sadly that the cake had fallen to the floor during the chaos. She had really wanted him to try it, but he simply smiled at her. He told her it didn't matter and that next time, they would just buy it again together. He promised they would buy 10 or even 8 cakes, as many as it took until they were both sick of them. That night, Fu Bongwang held his hand tightly, though her sleep remained restless and uneasy. She would wake at the slightest movement, pulling him closer as if afraid he might disappear. He whispered softly into her ear, telling her there was no longer any reason to be afraid. He assured her that she had him now and that no one would ever be able to intimidate her again. She murmured a dazed response, nestling even deeper into the safety of his arms. The following morning, we see them making their way back to Nanshan. As for the matter regarding Su Tianlei, it was settled with surprising speed. Between the trespassing and the intentional injuries, the case against her was quite clear. With such solid evidence, Nanda University wasted no time in issuing an official announcement of her expulsion. In the end, her little schemes and clever tricks resulted in a spectacular backfire. It was a fitting fate for her, really, and with Su Tianlei gone, he finally felt his heart at peace. He immediately threw himself into creating his draft for the upcoming design competition. Fu Bongwang stayed by his side every day, serving him tea, peeling fruit, and helping whenever he felt stuck. They would walk in the park or feel the river breeze together while discussing colors and composition. With her there, he felt a particular sense of calm, and his creative ideas began to flow with absolute clarity. Eventually, his mother-in-law also learned that he was participating in the contest. She called him specifically to clarify that she wouldn't favor his entry just because he was her son-in-law. However, she did offer to give him some professional advice from her perspective as an expert. He thought about it, but politely declined, telling her he wanted to win the prize on his own merits. He told her he didn't want anyone saying he had used his family's influence to get ahead. Even if he didn't win the prize, he felt it was important to have tried on his own terms. Half a month later, we see that his draft was finally complete. As he looked over the work on the drawing paper, his heart filled with a deep sense of achievement. He had drawn Fu Bongwang and himself on the beach, holding hands. The starry sky looked like a painting, set against the backdrop of the shimmering sea and the deep blue horizon. The color saturation was perfect, a rare feat, to be sure. Every stroke hid his love for her, and when Fu Bongwang saw the draft, her eyes lit up with joy. She hugged him and kissed him, telling him that he drew beautifully. She was certain it would win a prize, so he playfully pinched her cheek in response. He hoped her words would be prophetic, and after submitting the work, a long wait began. He found himself checking the official contest website every single day. Full of expectation, he paced the living room, while Fu Bongwang always comforted him with a smile. Finally, the day arrived when the results of the competition were announced. He had won the gold prize, and the moment he saw the result, he was so moved he couldn't even speak. He pulled Fu Bongwang into a tight embrace and spun her around several times. She wrapped her arms around his neck with a laugh, kissing his face over and over again. Not long after, his mother-in-law and father-in-law called him to offer their congratulations. His mother-in-law told Aiken how proud she was, saying she always knew he could do it. His father-in-law agreed he had real talent, and with the prize money in hand, the first thing he did was head to a jewelry store. And so, we see him realize there was only one thing left to do: choose a diamond ring for Fu Bongwang. It wasn't a particularly expensive model, but he chose it with the utmost care. The inside of the ring was engraved with their names, Suchin and Fu Bangguang. That evening, as soon as he arrived home, he took out the ring. He dropped to one knee and held it up before Fu Bangguang, calling her name with total sincerity. He told her that when they had rushed into marriage, he hadn't given her anything at all. There had been no proposal, no ring, and not even a decent wedding, which was true enough. But he wanted her to know his intentions had never been a momentary whim. He confessed that he loved her more every day and simply couldn't live this life without her. He asked if she would marry him, not in a rush this time, but with a serious ceremony. With all the proper protocols in place, Fu Bangguang stood there, tears streaming down her face. Nodding her head, she answered with a broken voice that yes, she wanted to. She repeated her yes to Suchin as he finally slid the ring onto her finger. He told her that from now on, this ring would keep her tied to him. He joked that she wouldn't be able to escape in this lifetime, but she wasn't afraid. She had no fear of this life at all, and in the following days, they began to prepare for the wedding. His parents were busy with the arrangements, more so than the couple themselves, it seemed. His mother-in-law personally designed the wedding dress and the suit. The gown was pure white, delicately embroidered with small pearls and fine lace. It made Fu Bangguang look like a fairy, while the black suit was custom-made just for him. The suit fit him exceptionally well, while his father-in-law took charge of organizing the wedding venue and the guest list. He organized everything to perfection, and we see that his brothers were just as busy with the preparations. Hu Yanzhou took on the role of head groomsman, leading the group with pride. Meanwhile, Zhang Pin and Jian Lintu were running back and forth, making sure every detail was handled. They helped him decorate the room and buy the traditional wedding sweets, tasks they took very seriously. The wedding was set for graduation day, a date that would mark two endings and one very big beginning. The Nanxing University campus was filled with the sounds of laughter and the bittersweet joy of graduation. His wedding was held that same day, right there on the Nanda campus. It was, after all, the very place where he and Fu Bangguang had first met. It was where our story began, and on the wedding day, the sun shone brightly while a gentle breeze blew. Fu Bangguang, wearing the dress designed by her mother, walked toward him step by step on her father's arm. She had a soft smile on her face, and in that moment, everything felt exactly as it should. He felt as if the entire world had gone silent, leaving him with eyes only for her. His father-in-law placed her hand in his, gave him a firm pat on the shoulder, and told him seriously that he was entrusting her to him. He warned him that if he ever dared to mistreat her, he wouldn't be forgiven, a fair warning, to be honest. Jian Lintu, acting as groomsman, took the stage to recount their most embarrassing moments, starting from the day Suchin called her wife in class. He went on about them getting caught skipping class and the drama with Su Tianlei, which had the whole crowd laughing. Fu Bangguang leaned against him, smiling so widely that her eyes practically disappeared. And then, during the exchange of the rings, a quiet, expectant hush fell over the ceremony. Fu Bangguang placed a matching ring on his finger and softly asked Suchin to look after her for the rest of their lives. He squeezed her hand and gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead, telling her that his entire life belonged to her. After the wedding, we see the two of them, still in their gown and tuxedo, walking through the Nanxing University campus. Everything there remained the same, except for the fact that the person by his side was now his partner for life. A few classmates spotted them and called out with wide smiles. They wished Fu Bangguang a happy marriage, and she responded with a grin, playing with his hand as she leaned her head on his shoulder. The sun continued to shine down on them, looking warm and quite beautiful. He looked down at her and softly asked if she remembered how it all started. When he first heard the previous teacher had resigned, he was thrilled, thinking he'd finally escaped his physics homework. He never imagined that the woman he had suddenly married would end up becoming his new physics professor. In that moment, he truly believed he was living through the most absurd situation in the world. She playfully asked if it still felt absurd, so he pinched her cheek, leaned down, and kissed her. He told her quite seriously that it wasn't absurd at all, not in the slightest. To him, it was simply the most fortunate encounter of his entire life. After so many twists and turns, it turns out his destiny had already been written. It had been 10 years since that initial, sudden marriage atmosphere first began. From picking her up at the sports school airport to the deep, mutual affection they now shared. The story of Suchin and Fu Bangguang began with an accident and ended with a profound love. For the rest of their lives, through every passing spring and autumn, through the cold and the heat, he would hold her hand and keep walking forward. They would never be apart again, cherishing every little quarrel and every moment they spent together. These moments will become the most precious memories of our lives together. They will remain tucked away in our hearts, keeping them warm forever.